The Arizona sun was a relentless eye in the sky, baking the pavement of the long, lonely state route until the air shimmered with heat. Inside his black Dodge Charger, Robert Dean let the miles unspool to the steady rhythm of a Bill Withers tune. For 3 days, he'd been just Uncle Rob, a welcome visitor from Chicago, a world away from the high-level task forces and life-and-death choices that defined his real job. His work phone sat dark and silent in the cup holder. He glanced at the dash. 63 miles per hour in a 65 zone. Perfect. That's when he saw it. A highway patrol car, a flicker in the rear-view mirror, closed in the distance with predatory speed until it was glued to his bumper, way too close. Robert eased off the accelerator, but the cruiser stayed with him. A moment later, flashing lights painted his mirror in strobing red and blue. A sudden, arrogant order. He signaled and pulled smoothly onto the gravel shoulder, his hands calm on the wheel. He knew the drill, hands visible, stay professional. But as 2 officers climbed out of their cruiser, a familiar, cold tension coiled in his stomach. The older one, Kinch, had a face like worn leather and a jaw that looked bolted in place. The younger one, Brand, moved with a restless energy, his hostility barely contained. They separated, taking positions on either side of his car, a textbook Pincer move. Kinch tapped on the driver's side window. Robert lowered it halfway. "Is there a problem, officer?" The older cop didn't answer immediately. His gaze drifted from Robert's face to his hands, then did a slow, appraising sweep of the Charger's interior. "License and registration?" Kinch finally grunted. "Saw you swerve over the line back there." "No, you didn't." "I don't believe I did," Robert said, his voice perfectly even. "But here are my documents." He moved with slow, deliberate care, retrieving the papers from the glove box. Each motion was measured, designed to signal he was not a threat. Kinch took the license, squinting at the name. "Dean," he muttered, intentionally mispronouncing it. He held it just a second too long before flicking a near-invisible nod to his partner. "I'm going to need you to open the trunk," Kinch ordered, his tone flat. Robert's eyes remained fixed on the road ahead. "On what grounds?" "Do you have probable cause for a search, officer?" Brand shifted his weight, his hand dropping to rest on his holstered weapon. "Got something you don't want us to see in there, buddy?" "They're looking for a reason." "Any reason?" Robert realized. "I know my rights," he stated calmly. "And I know exactly what's in my trunk. This doesn't have to be difficult," Kinch said, his voice hardening. "You can either comply, or we can make this a whole lot harder for you." The silence stretched, thick with unspoken threats. Robert knew the game was already rigged. He pressed the trunk release button on his dash. A soft electronic pop echoed in the dry air. As Brand disappeared toward the rear of the Charger, Robert braced himself. This wasn't a stop. It was an ambush. A moment later, Brand reappeared, dangling a clear plastic baggie of white powder between his thumb and forefinger. "Well, look what we have here," he said, a smug grin spreading across his face. Robert met his eyes in the side mirror. "That bag isn't mine." "You sure about that?" Brand sneered. "I'm positive." Kinch leaned down, his face uncomfortably close to the open window. His breath was stale with cheap coffee. "You're a long way from Chicago, pal. Out here in the real world. People who argue with the law find themselves in a world of hurt." Robert looked him square in the eye. His voice was quiet, but sharp as broken glass. "I am not your pal. I do not consent to the search, and I am formally requesting legal representation, effective immediately. That item was not in my vehicle when you opened the trunk." Kinch's eyebrows shot up in mock surprise. He chuckled and looked at his partner. "You hear that, Brand? We got ourselves a regular city lawyer here. The guilty ones always know the most fancy words." Brand laughed, a short, ugly bark. "I'm not guilty," Robert replied, his gaze unwavering. "And if you were confident in your evidence, you wouldn't need to resort to cheap insults. This is an illegal stop, and you know it." The older officer's face hardened into a mask of contempt. He took a half-step closer, his presence filling the window. "It's that tone of yours," he murmured, his eyes narrowing to slits. "You think because you drive a nice car, you're somebody special. Out here, You learn fast that a badge means more than your opinion. Robert didn't flinch. Then I suggest you uphold the law that badge represents, officer. Get your supervisor on the radio. Now. A flash of pure fury crossed Kinch's face. The nerve. This guy on his road, telling him how to do his job. The moment stretched, thin and electric, ready to snap. Get out of the car, Kinch ordered, his voice dropping to a low, menacing growl. No, Robert replied, firm and absolute, not without a supervisor. You have no lawful cause for my arrest, and I will not legitimize it. The bag you're holding is inadmissible, and this farce is over. That's when Kinch broke. With a guttural snarl, he reached through the window, unlocked the door, and wrenched it open. The metal groaned. He grabbed Robert by the arm, his fingers digging into muscle like talons, and hauled him out of the driver's seat. Brand moved in instantly, a blur of practiced violence. They were a well-oiled machine of intimidation. They didn't read him his rights. They didn't state a charge. They slammed him hard against the side of the Charger, the black metal searing hot from the Arizona sun. The handcuffs were ratcheted on, each click a sharp, punishing sound, cinched so tight they bit deep into his wrists. Not so tough now, are you, Mr. Big Shot? Brand hissed in his ear. Robert kept his back straight, his jaw set, even as they shoved him toward the patrol car. He would not give them the satisfaction. This is an illegal arrest, he said, his voice tight with controlled rage, not fear. I offered no resistance. That powder was planted. I want both of your badge numbers. They shoved him into the back of the cruiser, without another word, through the grimy plexiglass. He watched cars slow on the highway. The drivers' faces a mix of pity and morbid curiosity. They saw exactly what they were supposed to see, a black man being arrested by two white cops. A scene so common it was invisible. The precinct smelled of stale coffee, sweat, and cheap disinfectant, the official perfume of petty tyranny. The desk sergeant, a man whose face sagged with a lifetime of boredom, took Robert's information without looking up. Possession resisting, he mumbled, his pen scratching across a form. He swiveled in his squeaking chair and turned to a clunky computer terminal, beginning to type with two fingers. D-E. His fingers slowed, then stopped. He leaned closer to the screen, his brow furrowed. A red flag had appeared next to the name. Then another, this one flashing. The sergeant's posture straightened, the boredom on his face dissolving into confusion, then dawning disbelief. The screen blinked, displaying an official government photograph next to a title that made the air in his lungs turn to ice. Deputy Director, Drug Enforcement Administration. Clearance, TS/SCI. Do not detain. Immediate federal notification required. The desk sergeant went bone white. He looked up from the screen to Robert, truly seeing him for the first time, his face a mask of pure, undiluted terror. Sir, we had no idea, he stammered, his hand trembling as he fumbled for the phone. I need to get my captain on a secure line right now. Robert took a single, deliberate step forward. The steel cuffs on his wrists were no longer a symbol of his humiliation, but of their catastrophic error. His presence seemed to fill the entire room. Put the phone down, he commanded. His voice was quiet, yet carried the weight of a battering ram. You will do exactly as I say. Lock down this building. Freeze all access to your internal network. Seal the surveillance logs of this booking desk, and every patrol car that was on duty today. Every single record is now federal evidence. He met the sergeant's terrified gaze. As of this moment, this station is under my authority. Less than an hour later, the first of Robert's people arrived. The local precinct was locked down tight. Officers Kinch and Brand were nowhere to be found. They had vanished. But it didn't matter. The evidence they had so arrogantly planted was already speaking for them. The baggie of white powder, it turned out, was laced with microscopic federal tracking isotope, linking it to a major cartel takedown in Nogales. It was evidence that was supposed to be sealed in a DEA vault hundreds of miles away. They hadn't just framed a random citizen. They had used the government's own bait to do it. With the full, unrestricted power of the DEA at his command, Robert ripped open the county's records. It wasn't just a pattern. It was a hunting ground. Dozens of cases, all targeting minority drivers, all with mysteriously corrupted or missing body cam footage. And then he found him, Jamal Reading, a 22-year-old kid who had died in custody 6 months earlier. The official report was a one-page lie, a hastily written suicide narrative that his family had been fighting ever since. Robert's investigators unearthed the evidence they'd buried, a bystander cell phone video showing Kinch and Brand beating the young man unconscious behind the station. It was cold-blooded murder disguised as procedure. An informant, finally feeling safe enough to talk, laid out the whole rotten scheme. Kinch and Brand were just a muscle for a network that stretched across 3 counties. The operation was an insidious ghost protocol known as the Ghost Ledger, designed to make seized narcotics vanish from evidence lockers and reappear on the streets. The architect was Vincent Kane, a disgraced former federal agent who had supposedly died years ago. He was the ghost in the machine. The hunt for Kinch and Brand ended at a rundown trailer park in the desert. When the DEA tactical team descended, Robert was at the front. The moment of recognition on the 2 officers' faces, the dawning, sickening horror as they realized a man they tried to frame was now the man holding their lives in his hands, was a perfect prelude to justice. They found Kane not in hiding, but living in plain sight in a lavish Scottsdale mansion. He sat in a digital command center, surrounded by the glow of monitors, the architect of a phantom empire. He didn't resist when they breached the door. He simply looked up at Robert with an unsettling calm, the supreme arrogance of a man who believed he was untouchable. That arrogance was his final mistake. In a packed federal courtroom, Kinch and Brand stood pale and trembling. Before the judge handed down their sentence, 2 marshals stepped forward. One ripped the badges from their uniforms. The other unclipped their empty holsters and gun belts, dropping them on the prosecution's table with a heavy thud. Stripped of their power and their swagger, they looked like what they were, cheap thugs. The judge sentenced them to life in prison for the murder of Jamal Reading, with consecutive decades added for their corruption. The cameras flashed as Vincent Kane, the untouchable mastermind, was led away in chains, his digital empire reduced to a 6-by-9-foot concrete cell as Supermax facility where he would remain for the rest of his natural life.